There are things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. The sound of boots striking the wooden floor of your house at 3 a.m., the smell of gun oil mixed with male sweat, the feeling of a calloused hand clamping onto your arm while another shoves your 8-month belly as if it were a sack. My name is Victoire Delacroix. I am 90 years old, and for 60 of those years, I kept a secret that now has to come out. Not because I want it to, but because the dead can't speak, and someone has to tell what happened to them. When the German soldiers took me from my home that night in March 1944, I was 33 weeks pregnant. My baby kicked my ribs as if he wanted to come into the world right away, as if he sensed something horrible was about to happen. I didn't know it yet, but he was right. What they did to me before the birth has no name in any language I know, and what they did afterward was even worse. They didn't take me alone. That night, there were 17 of us, all young, all pretty enough to draw attention. 5 were pregnant like me. The others were virgins, fiancés, or young mothers. We were chosen like fruit at a market. They went from house to house with lists with our names. That meant someone from our own village had denounced us. Someone we knew, someone who had drunk coffee in our kitchen. I lived in Toul, a working-class town in central France, famous for its weapons factories. My father worked at the factory. My mother, under coercion, sewed uniforms for the German army. We had learned to lower our eyes when soldiers passed, not to answer if they spoke to us, to pretend we didn't exist. But that night, pretending wasn't enough. Henry, my boyfriend, tried to protect me. He threw himself in front of the soldier, dragging me toward the door. I heard the sound of a rifle butt striking his head before I saw blood, then silence. My mother screamed. My father stood frozen, hands raised, trembling. I turned one last time before they shoved me into the truck. I saw my house. I saw the window of my bedroom, the baby linens folded on the dresser. I saw my whole life come apart as the engine swallowed any hope of returning. Inside the truck, we were 17, packed together. Some cried, others were in shock. A 16-year-old girl vomited at my feet. I pressed my belly with both hands and prayed my baby wouldn't be born there in the dark, among terrified strangers. We didn't know where they were taking us. We didn't know why. We only knew that when Germans took women away in the middle of the night, they usually didn't come back the same. The journey lasted hours. When the truck finally stopped, I heard German voices outside, quick, clipped orders. The canvas was yanked down, and flashlights blinded us. We were forced out. Some stumbled, and I would have fallen if a hand hadn't caught my elbow. It wasn't courtesy. It was efficiency. They wanted us to arrive intact. We were at a forced labor camp on the outskirts of Toul. I knew the place before the war. It had been a farm. Now there were barbed wire fences, guard towers, collapsing wooden huts, and the stench of sewage and burnt meat. There were other women, French, Polish, Russian, all of them young, all with a wandering stare I only understood later, the look of someone who no longer expects anything else. If you're listening now, you might think this is just another war story, another sad story that ends with a comforting lesson. But that isn't the case, because what happened in the following weeks offers no comfort, and if you think you've heard worse stories, I promise you, you haven't heard mine. On the first night, they separated us. The pregnant women were moved to another barracks. They said we would receive special care. For a brief moment, I felt relief, because when the door of that hut closed behind us, I realized there was no bed and no blanket. There was only a tall German officer with pale eyes, smoking a cigarette and watching us as if we were livestock. He spoke French fluently, without an accent. In a way, that was worse, because it meant he understood every word we said, every plea, every scream, and chose to ignore it. He walked slowly among the 5 of us, stopping at each belly, touching it with the tips of his fingers as if checking whether fruit was ripe. When he reached me, he stopped. He stood there, motionless, looking at me. I didn't look away. I don't know why. Maybe pride, maybe defiance, or maybe sheer terror. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had just won. He pointed at me and said a word in German to the soldier beside him. The soldier grabbed my arm and took me outside. The other 4 stayed in the barracks. I heard their screams before I was even gone. To this day, I don't know what happened to them that night. I don't know whether their fate was better or worse than mine. They moved me to another building, smaller and cleaner. It had a bed, a bathroom, and a window covered by a curtain. For one insane moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I would survive. That he had chosen me to protect. That my swollen belly and the child living inside me would be armor enough. I was young. I was naive. I still believed monsters respected limits. He entered the room 2 hours later. He closed the door. Slowly, he removed his jacket, folding it carefully over a chair. He lit another cigarette. He watched me. I sat on the bed with my hands on my belly, trying to make myself smaller. He came closer and sat beside me. He put his hand on my face. His palm was warm. His fingers smelled of tobacco and metal. "You're beautiful," he said in standard French. "Your baby will be born here, under my care. You will thank me for that." I didn't thank him. Not that night, and not on the 27 nights that followed. In the first nights, he only watched me. He sat in a chair in the corner, smoking, asking questions. My name, my age. I answered in a low voice, afraid any wrong word would cost me my life. He seemed satisfied. He said I was well-mannered and that I understood how things worked there. On the 5th night, he touched my belly gently, as if he had the right. He felt my baby kick and let out a short, almost childish laugh. "Strong," he said. "He'll be a fighter." I bit my lip until I tasted blood so I wouldn't scream, so I wouldn't push his hand away, because I knew if I resisted, he wouldn't hurt me. He would hurt the baby. On the 10th night, he assaulted me for the first time, carefully, slowly, as if he were being kind to me, as if my huge belly were only a technical obstacle to overcome. He turned me on my side, held me by the hips, and whispered in my ear not to be afraid, that he wouldn't hurt the baby, that he loved me. After that, he slept in my bed. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling my baby move, wondering whether he could sense what was happening, whether he knew his mother was being destroyed while he grew. The days blurred. I stopped counting. I measured time differently. How many times he came at night, how many times my baby kicked afterward, how many times I thought of Henry and wondered if he was still alive, if he was looking for me, if he knew I was carrying our child through a hell he couldn't even imagine. The commander's name was Sturmbannführer Klaus Richter. I knew it because he repeated it again and again, wanting me to pronounce it correctly, with respect, as if we were lovers and not jailer and prisoner. He was 38, married, with 3 children in Bavaria. He showed me photos, 2 blonde boys and a girl, smiling in traditional clothes. He said he loved them and missed them. Then he turned to me and did what he did. He wasn't the only one. Sometimes other officers came, but not to my room, because Richter wouldn't allow it. I belonged only to him. But I could hear them in the other barracks, the screams, the begging, the sudden silence that was worse than the screams. One night I heard a woman screaming in Polish for hours. The next morning she wasn't screaming anymore. She was never seen again. There was a French nurse in the camp. Her name was Margot. She was maybe 50, thin, with gray hair. They forced her to work there because her husband had joined the resistance. She examined me once a week, measured my blood pressure, and listened to the baby's heartbeat with an old stethoscope. She rarely spoke, but once, as she placed her hand on my belly, she whispered, "Don't resist. Stay alive first. Justice will come later." I didn't understand then. I thought it was better to survive and resist. She had seen other pregnant women before me. She knew what happened to those who resisted. They disappeared, or worse, they gave birth and disappeared. Margot tried to save me in the only way she knew, telling me to stay quiet, keep my head down, and allow my body to be used so my baby could live. But how do you do that? How does a mother let herself be destroyed and, at the same time, protect what is growing inside her? Every night I felt as if I were being torn in half. There was Victoire, the one who endured, who closed her eyes and imagined she was somewhere else, who kept a hand on her belly, who sang lullabies silently, who promised her baby that everything would be all right, that his mother was strong, that his mother would protect him. Weeks passed. My belly grew, and the birth drew near. Margot told me it would be soon, maybe a week or 2. I was afraid to give birth in that place, afraid of what would happen afterward. Richter spoke to me more and more about the child. He said he would make sure I was well cared for, well fed, that I would have a chance. But he never said, "your son." Instead, he said, "the child," as if the child was no longer mine. One night, he came in with a bottle of good French wine, stolen from a cellar. He sat beside me and spoke with something like sincerity. He told me about his life, his childhood in Munich, studying law, joining the party because that's what you did, climbing the ranks, learning not to ask questions, learning to do what he was told and ignore what was happening around him. He said, "Do you think I'm a monster?" I said nothing. Then he continued, "Maybe you're right, but monsters aren't born, Victoire. They're made, in war, in fear, and in orders that cannot be refused." I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I had never seen before. He thought he was a victim. He believed he was suffering too, that what he did to me and the others was something forced upon him, not a choice but a duty. A cold, dangerous anger rose inside me. I opened my mouth, almost speaking, almost pouring out everything in my mind. But I remembered Margot's words, "Stay alive first." So I closed my eyes, lowered my head, and let silence speak for me. That night, he didn't touch me. He sat in the chair, sleeping, the empty bottle at his feet. I looked out the window. It was raining, a light, cold rain, like the rain at the end of March. I imagined it washing everything away. The camp, the war, the hands that touched me. But morning came, and nothing changed. 3 days later, the contractions began. At first, they weren't strong, just a tug low in my abdomen, coming and going. I tried not to say anything, but Richter noticed. He noticed everything. He called Margot immediately. He stared at me and said, "It started, but it could take hours, maybe all night." He grew nervous. I had rarely seen him like that. He paced, smoking one cigarette after another. He ordered them to take me to a better-equipped room, an old storage building converted into something like a delivery room. There was a metal table, clean white sheets though stained, and surgical instruments lined up on a rusty tray. Margot stayed with me. Between contractions, she held my hand, telling me to breathe, not to push too soon, to wait. Hours passed, and the pain grew. It was no longer waves. It was an ocean crushing me from the inside. I was sweating and shaking. My body was doing what it was designed to do, in the worst place imaginable. Richter wanted to be there, but he couldn't bear to see me in pain. Or maybe he couldn't bear to see me in pain because of him, because he had helped create this, because he kept me there instead of letting me go. Around midnight, the contractions became unbearable. Margot checked and said, "It's time." He looked straight at me and said, "You're strong, Victoire. You can do this. Just think of him." I pushed. I screamed. I felt my body tearing. I thought I was dying, and for a moment I even wanted to die, just to escape the pain. Then I heard a thin, sharp, furious cry, "My baby!" Margot lifted him, wrapped him in a gray blanket, and handed him to me. I held him tight, and everything vanished. The camp, the war, Richter, everything. All that remained was that red little face, the closed eyes, the clenched fists. He was alive. He was there. He was mine. "It's a boy," Margot whispered, "a healthy boy." I cried, not from relief or joy, but from complete exhaustion. I had survived, and he had survived too. For now, that was enough. Richter came in. He stepped closer and looked at the baby. His features softened, and for a second he almost looked gentle. He reached out and touched my son's cheek with one finger. "He's beautiful," he said softly. "What will you name him?" I looked at him, and I thought of Henry. I thought of the life we were supposed to have. I thought of the name we had chosen together at the kitchen table months before everything collapsed. "Theo," I said. "His name is Theo." Richter nodded. "Theo, what a beautiful name." He stood there for a moment looking at us. Then he said something I will never forget. "I'll make sure nothing happens to him. That is my promise." I didn't know whether to believe him. In that moment, I had no choice. The first weeks with Theo were strange. I was a mother in a forced labor camp. I lived in a locked room, changing his diapers with whatever scraps of cloth I could find, singing softly to him while women screamed in the barracks nearby. Margot came every day to check on him. She brought boiled water and a little formula whenever she could. She never smiled, but I could see in her eyes she was doing everything possible. Richter came too, more often than before, but he didn't touch me anymore, not in those first weeks. He kept his distance, watched Theo sleep, and asked questions. Was he eating well? Did he cry much? Did I need anything? It was infuriating, as if he were trying to play a role. as if he wanted to be someone else, a protector, almost a father. But I knew what he was. I knew what he did. And I knew that kindness was just another kind of control. One night he brought something, a small wooden box. Inside were clean, soft baby clothes, probably stolen from somewhere in France. He handed it to me with an almost shy smile. "For Theo," he said. "Thank you," I whispered, because saying no would have put me in danger. But inside, I hated myself. I hated being grateful to the man who abused me, who held me captive, who decided everything in my life. But Theo was getting stronger every day, and as long as he was safe, I could endure the rest. Then, one morning, Margot came in with a face I had never seen before, pale, tense, afraid. She closed the door behind her and whispered, "The Allies are advancing. They've liberated cities in the north. The Germans are preparing to evacuate." My heart leapt at a word I no longer dared to think, but Margot wasn't smiling. "Victoire," she said, her voice barely audible, "listen to me carefully. When a camp is evacuated, no witnesses are left behind. Do you understand what that means? It meant we would all die, or be deported somewhere else, somewhere worse." "You have to leave," Margot said. She pulled a small, rusted key from her pocket. "The back door opens, the one that leads into the forest. There's a hole in the fence, 50 meters to the east. Take Theo. Run. Don't stop." "And you?" I asked. "I'll stay," she said. "I'll cover your escape. I'll say you ran while I was changing the sheets and that I saw nothing." "They'll kill you," I said. She smiled for the first time since I'd met her, sad, resigned. "Victoire, I'm old. I have nothing left to lose. You and that little boy. You have your whole life ahead of you. Take this key. You'll have an hour, maybe 2. She pressed the key into my palm and left. I stared at that key all day. I gripped it so tightly it left a mark in my skin. I knew it was my only chance, and I was terrified. Terrified of the dark, terrified of the forest, terrified of what waited outside, and above all, terrified of what would happen to Theo if I was caught. But staying meant certain death. So I decided. At midnight, I wrapped Theo in every blanket I had. I tied him to my chest with a shawl. He was sleeping, thank God. I went to the back door and slid the key in. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The lock clicked. The door opened. Cool air brushed my face. I breathed in the smell of wet earth, pine, and freedom. I looked back one last time, then I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to go east, like Margot said. My feet sank into mud. Branches scratched my face. Theo began to cry. I pressed my hand gently over his mouth to muffle the sound, hating myself even as I did it. I found the hole in the fence, small, jagged. I squeezed through, shielding Theo with my arms. Barbed wire tore my clothes and my skin, but I made it. And then I ran. I ran like I had never run in my life, through the forest in the darkness, not knowing where I was, only that I had to get as far from that place as possible. After an hour, or maybe 2, I collapsed. Exhaustion swallowed me whole. My legs couldn't carry me anymore. I fell against a tree, gasping, shaking. Theo was crying loudly now. He was hungry. He was cold. So was I. I tried to nurse him. my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold him. But he latched on. He drank. And there, in the black nowhere, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Then I heard voices in the distance, then closer. Searchlights cut through the trees. Dogs barked. They were looking for me. I clutched Theo and stumbled deeper into the forest. I had no strength left. My legs shook. My lungs burned. But I kept moving because stopping meant death. For both of us. The voices grew nearer. The dogs, too. I could hear them, paws striking the ground, barking sharp and eager. And Richter was with them. I recognized his voice as clearly as if he were beside my ear. "Victoire," he shouted. "Come back. You won't survive out there. Think of the child." Thinking of the child was exactly what I was doing, and it was why I would never return. I found a small river, frozen at the edges but running fast. I remembered something my father told me when I was young. Dogs lose the scent in water. I stepped into it. The water rose to my knees, so cold it felt like it was freezing my bones. I pulled Theo tight against me, trying to keep him dry. And I walked. I walked in that river for hours. The barking faded, then stopped. They lost me. I climbed out where the trees thinned. I found a hollow log and crawled inside with Theo. We were soaked, numb, shaking, but hidden. I waited through the night, listening to the forest. Every snap of a branch made my blood turn cold. Every bird call sounded like a warning. But no one came. At dawn, I crawled out. My clothes were still damp. Theo was pale. His lips were blue. I had to find help, fast. I walked all morning. I didn't know where I was. Everything looked the same. Trees, hills, muddy paths. Then, far off, I saw smoke. A chimney. A farmhouse. I hesitated. What if they were collaborators? What if they handed me over? But Theo needed heat. He needed food. I had no choice. I approached slowly. It was a small stone house with a chicken coop and a garden. An old woman was outside feeding hens. She saw me, and I raised my hands. "Please," I said, my voice raw and cracked, "please help us." She looked at Theo, then at me. She saw my torn dress, my bare feet smeared with blood, my hollow face, and she understood. "Come in," she said. Her name was Madeleine Giraud, 70 years old, a widow. Her husband had died in 1940 at the beginning of the war. Her son had joined the resistance, and she didn't know if he was still alive. She had lived alone for 3 years, and she hated the Germans more than anyone I'd ever known. She sat me by the fire. She gave me dry clothes and a bowl of hot soup. She checked Theo. "He's alive," she said, "as cold and hungry as you are." I cried. For the first time in weeks, I cried for real. Madeleine didn't ask questions. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "You're safe now." When I woke up, it was dark. Theo was asleep beside me, wrapped in a clean blanket. Madeleine sat by the fireplace, knitting. "They're here," she said without looking up. "The Germans." My stomach dropped. "They came looking for a young woman with a child," Madeleine continued, her needles clicking softly. "I told them I hadn't seen anything. They searched the barn, but they didn't search the house. Then they left." My blood turned to ice. "Will they come back?" I asked. "Maybe," she said, "but not tonight. Tomorrow you'll leave." "Where will I go?" I whispered. Madeline finally lifted her eyes. There's a network, she said. The Resistance. They move people to liberated areas. I can get you to a contact point, but then you'll have to walk. Maybe a few days. I nodded, even though my whole body wanted to refuse. Refusing wasn't an option. The next morning, before the sun rose, Madeline packed what little she could spare: bread, a piece of cheese, a small bottle of water, and a cloth bundle for Theo. She wrapped my hands around a cup of warm something, herbal, bitter, and made me drink. Then she placed her palm against my cheek, like a mother would. "Keep your head down," she said, "and if anyone asks, you're my niece." 2 days later, at a meeting point that looked like nothing at all, just a bend in a dirt road near a stand of trees, I met a man named Jan. He was in his 30s, thin, restless, with eyes that never stopped scanning the horizon. He looked at Theo first, then at me. "You're late," he said. "I had a baby," I answered, and my voice came out sharper than I expected. For a fraction of a second, something like respect crossed his face. He nodded once. "All right, let's go." Jan led us along hidden paths, through forest trails, dry gullies, narrow ditches, and once through a low tunnel that smelled of wet stone. We traveled at night and hid during the day, pressed into bushes or abandoned sheds, listening for engines, boots, dogs. There were others with us too: Jews, political prisoners, a deserter with a shattered hand, a teenage girl who never spoke. We became a strange, silent line of shadows, joined by the same fear and the same fragile hope. One night we heard gunfire in the distance. Jan froze and raised his hand. Everyone stopped. German patrols were nearby. He pushed us into a shallow trench and motioned for us to lie flat. We did. The earth was cold and damp beneath my cheek. I pulled Theo close, praying he would sleep, praying he would stay silent. Minutes passed, then more. Boots crunched somewhere beyond the trees. A low voice spoke in German. Another answered. Theo stirred. I felt it before it happened, the small movement of his mouth, the tightening of his chest. He began to cry. My heart slammed against my ribs. Panic flooded my arms and legs, turning them to stone. I covered his mouth with my hand. Not hard, not cruel, but firm enough to smother the sound. Tears ran down my face into the dirt. The footsteps came closer. I didn't breathe. Then they moved away again, slowly, as if the forest had swallowed us whole. We lived, again. After 9 days of walking, we reached an area that had been liberated by American forces. I saw soldiers in khaki uniforms, French flags hanging from windows, people crying openly in the streets. The war wasn't over, not even close. But for the first time in months, the air felt different, less heavy, less cursed. In the region around Nancy and Toul, U.S. forces fought across the Moselle in September 1944 as part of the campaign to liberate eastern France. John brought me to a refugee center. Nurses, some in Red Cross attire, registered me, gave me temporary papers, and asked questions in careful voices. My name, where I was from, whether I had family, whether I had anywhere to go. The war produced large-scale refugee administration and documentation efforts, including U.S.-linked rescue and relief coordination structures established in 1944. "I want to go back to Tula," I said. I still believed, stupidly, desperately, that if I returned to the place where my life had been stolen, I might find pieces of it waiting. 3 weeks later, I went back. Nothing was left. My house had been destroyed by bombing. My parents were gone, deported. Henry was dead. A neighbor who had survived told me what happened. He couldn't look me in the eyes when he spoke, his face twisted as if the words were poison. He said Henry had been hanged by the Germans the day after I was taken, as retaliation. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I didn't do anything dramatic. I just stood there with Theo in my arms, staring at the ruins where my kitchen used to be, where the baby linens had been folded on the dresser, where Henry had kissed my forehead and promised we would be okay. There was nothing left. No photographs, no keepsakes, no oak cradle, only stones and ash. Years later, Toul became especially associated with a major German reprisal in June 1944, in which 99 men were hanged after mass arrests. I stood there a long time. Then I turned around and began to walk. The years after the war were blurred. I remember some things with painful clarity. The weight of Theo in my arms, his first steps, his first words. The rest feels like someone erased parts of my mind, scraped them out for survival. Maybe that's what trauma does. It preserves what matters and buries what would kill you to remember. I settled in Lyon, big enough, anonymous enough to start over. I found work in a textile factory. 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, I sewed buttons onto coats. I earned enough to rent one small room, a bed, a table, a stove. It was enough. Theo grew. He was a quiet child, sometimes too quiet, as if he sensed that silence was safety. I sang to him the same lullabies my mother had sung to me. I told him stories about his father, Henry the carpenter, brave and gentle, who loved us more than anything. I never told him the truth about his birth. I never told him where he was born. I never told him what was done to me while I carried him. How could I? How do you explain to a child that his first breath was taken in hell? If you were moved by my story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video so that more people can hear these memories, and so that atrocities like this are never forgotten.